It is June 30th, 1908, and an incredible explosion rocks the remote Tunguska region of Siberia in Russia. So powerful is the blast that it knocks people off their feet hundreds of miles away, blasts apart windows in houses, and kills countless reindeer. People see a bright flash in the sky, and a huge column of smoke rises up for miles. But what actually happened here? This is the mystery of the Tunguska event. The year is 1908, and the place is Siberia, the largest and one of the coldest regions in Russia. In fact, it's so large that it makes up around 1/8 of the entire country. But, despite its vast size, the population is surprisingly low, with most of the inhabitants being nomadic reindeer herders. It'll be a surprise to no one when I tell you that this part of the world is very, very remote. On June, something strange happens in the Tunguska region of the Siberian wilderness. In later accounts, witnesses describe seeing a brilliant flash of light over the horizon. The light was so bright that it put people's eyes completely out. Others saw a huge column of smoke rising up into the air. Soon, more witnesses would come forward with their own stories of what they saw and heard. Many reported seeing a fireball streaking through the sky before hearing a loud bang. Some said they saw a blue light, while others described it as green. Some even claimed to have seen a giant orange ball in the sky. There were people working in the area at the time who had never heard of such a thing as an earthquake. According to the geologist Leo Keelan, who would investigate the event years later, they only knew of the trembling of the earth as a punishment from God. Then came the sound, which some have compared to a clap of thunder or a cannon shot. Several people who were staying in a camp near Lake Labinka described how the ground beneath them began to tremble. One person recalled, "We were sitting by our tents in the evening. Suddenly, the ground began to shake like an earthquake. We ran out into the open in terror. The sun was shining brightly. There was not a cloud in the sky. The air was filled with fine dust, which rose in a dense fog above the trees. A heavy silence followed." Geologists who investigated the event later reported feeling the tremors all the way in St. Petersburg, nearly 2,000 miles away. And that's not all. Another Russian geologist, S.I. Lebedev, was in Arkhangelsk when the event happened, and he also felt the ground shake beneath his feet. What could have caused such a powerful explosion that could be felt thousands of miles away, while nobody witnessed the event itself? The Tunguska region was largely uninhabited at the time. There were a few small settlements nearby. However, most of the structures in these villages were made from wood and would have been destroyed in the explosion. Even if there had been people there, it's unlikely that anyone would have survived. Any buildings that did survive the blast were ravaged by a shockwave that followed. Windows were blown out across the area, and doors were flung off their hinges. According to eyewitnesses, the force of the explosion was so great that it blew them off their feet. But if the explosion was so powerful, why are there no impact craters? Well, the answer may lie in the substance that caused the explosion. While geologists later found that the Tunguska event flattened vast areas of forest, the damage was not consistent with a meteorite impact. No crater was ever found, and scientists have suggested that whatever struck the Earth simply vaporized upon impact. Scientists believe that the explosion could have been caused by a meteor, but not just any meteor. It would have to be an exceptionally rare kind called an airburst. Rather than impacting with the surface of the planet, the meteor exploded in midair. When it exploded, it released an estimated 12 megatons of TNT, about 30 times the power of the bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki during World War II. But how exactly does a meteor explode? To find out, we have to look at the composition of the meteor itself. In order to explode in midair, the object would need to be made of ice. That's because ice sublimates, meaning it turns straight from a solid into a gas when exposed to heat. As the meteor approached Earth's atmosphere, the intense heat would cause the ice to sublimate and expand rapidly, turning into a huge cloud of water vapor. This would cause the meteor to explode in mid-air. This is supported by the fact that many witnesses saw a giant fireball in the sky shortly before the explosion. It's believed that the explosion happened around 6 miles above the ground, though some have suggested it could have been much higher. Because the meteor exploded in mid-air, the energy was released in all directions, causing the devastation that was felt across such a wide area. The explosion is thought to have vaporized all of the ice almost instantly, leaving behind no solid debris. This would explain why there is no impact crater. In fact, there were reports of strange lights in the sky for weeks following the event. This has led some to speculate that fragments of the meteor were burning up in the atmosphere long after the initial explosion. But what actually happened to the people living in the region? While it's likely that the people living in the region were killed instantly by the explosion, it was probably the shockwave that caused the most devastation. According to eyewitness accounts, the shockwave reached speeds of up to 800 miles per hour. That's about 3 times the speed of sound. Houses were destroyed and tens of thousands of square miles of forest were flattened. The explosion is thought to have killed hundreds of reindeer, the main mode of transport for the local people. But just how many people lived in the area at the time? According to records, there were about 40,000 people living in the area, though it's possible that this number was vastly underestimated. Most of the people living in the area were nomads, and it would have been difficult to keep track of where they were at any given time. The explosion would have devastated the local population. When news of the event finally reached the outside world, it caused quite the stir. At first, people assumed that it must have been a meteorite that had hit the Earth. But, as time went on, rumors began to spread that the explosion was caused by an alien spaceship that had crashed to the ground. Of course, this was long before Roswell and Area 51 became part of the zeitgeist. But the story gained enough traction for the Russian government to intervene and set the record straight. They declared that the event was caused by a meteorite, putting an end to speculation. But this still doesn't explain why the meteorite had no noticeable effect on global temperatures. After all, the device that eventually became known as the atomic bomb was developed soon after, and it used the energy released by nuclear fission to cause the temperature of the device to rise to millions of degrees. Surely, a meteorite that exploded with 30 times the force of an atomic bomb would cause noticeable changes to the Earth's temperature, right? Well, yes, it should. But the explosion was not hot enough to cause the surrounding air to reach ignition temperature, which is between 2000 and 2500 degrees Fahrenheit. Instead, the explosion caused a fireball that lit up the sky, and the surrounding forests caught fire due to the intense heat. Although the explosion itself didn't cause the surrounding air to reach ignition temperature, the debris and dust that rained down from the sky afterwards did. One of the reasons that the explosion didn't cause noticeable global warming is because it happened in Siberia in the summer. Not only is Siberia a very remote part of the world, but it's also summer. This means that the majority of the energy was released over land and not over the oceans, where most of the world's heat is absorbed. What little heat was released during the winter months would have simply melted snow and ice, meaning that it would have had very little effect on global temperatures. Tunguska is still a complete mystery and has remained so for over 100 years. Could it really have been caused by an ice meteor exploding in the sky? Or was it something else entirely? Let me know your thoughts.